Continuing our course in Intarsia, I'd like to show you what I do with charts when working from a chart. By color coding the chart, I can tell every time I need to change strands of yarn to a different color or change to another strand of the same color, which I'll explain in a minute, and also how long each of those strands need to be so that I don't waste yarn. Let me show you a chart that I just worked for a new sweater, a Black Lives Matter sweater. This is the chart that I worked on the back of the sweater. I was working from the top down, and so the first thing I needed to do was change the orientation of the chart so I don't have to start working it at the top and go down, and I get the correct orientation of the image on the sweater after I'm done. In order to do that, I first mirror it vertically, and then I also mirror it horizontally. Now it is ready for me to begin working, and when I come in and work this row by row from the bottom up, it will create the opposite image in both directions, which is how I want it to appear on the sweater. Once I've got it positioned the way I want it positioned, I then color code it. And after color coding it, it looks like this. I can still tell which areas are black and which are white because I was careful to choose light colors to color code the white areas and dark colors to color code the black areas. When you color code your charts, you need to have some scheme in mind that you can easily recognize not only that you're changing to a new strand, but also what color of strand you should use. It's not too hard to come up with something like that that explains it. Now I'd first like to show you how I use this color-coded chart to work the pattern and how it helps me that it is color-coded. And then I'll show you exactly what the process is to color-code the chart. So let me expand on this and talk about how I work this chart. When I work a chart, and I'm doing it in the round, the beginning of the round is always up one edge of the color change. And in this case, I used the right edge, and so my beginning of round marker was always kept at this edge over here as I worked up the chart. It jumped over to here, and then it went all the way up there, and so forth. So when I actually begin the first round of the chart, I began round one, row one, at stitch number 28, and I was purling in this direction. So I had knitted all the way around my sweater, all the way up to the place where I wanted to locate stitch number 28. This is positioning the chart on the back of the sweater, so I have to know exactly which stitch I want to put it in. At stitch number 28, I then reversed directions and began purling back. In order to reverse directions on the first row, this is a tip that you need to know. Do a short row turn only on the first row. When you do a short row turn, it will close up a little tiny hole that will grow there if you don't do it. That hole does not have any loose strands around it when you're first starting, so there's nothing that is handy to close up the hole when you're weaving in ends. So that's why this is a pointer that I think is important to insert here. Start with a short row turn and then begin here at stitch number 28 and purl in this direction to the end of the chart all the way around the sweater and come in this side, and we're still on row one, so we work over to right here. At this point, the chart tells me to begin a new strand of white. I'm already working white. Why would I work a new strand? Well, because the strand I'm working is attached to the ball of yarn that I'm knitting all the way around the sweater, and I don't want to lose that ball of yarn. I want to keep it intact, so I start a new strand of yarn knowing that on the next row I would have to begin a new strand anyway, or continue that strand and start a new strand over here, because I don't want to stretch a yarn all the way across the back of these dark black sweaters. These black stitches. Sometimes my words just get tangled up. So I started a new strand here. I filled that strand, that area with that strand, continued the outside with the ball of yarn strand. Over here I started a strand of black. I worked those stitches in black. The black has to split between two different strands, and so as you see here, those are a different color than the burgundy. They're more of a deep burgundy or brown. So I know that that's two different strands of black that I'm now working. And that's basically it. I just knit each section as I come to it. When I come to a new section, say this one up here, and I need to start knitting a new strand of black, I count the number of stitches in that area, and then a little later in the video I will tell you how I take that count of stitches and calculate the length of yarn that I will need, so I can cut just the length I need or just a little extra to make sure I can cover all of those stitches and not have to add a second strand, but also not have a lot of yarn left over. So that's how I work the color chart. Now let me show you how to color code a chart. I'm going to begin using this sample chart just to give you an idea of how I color code charts. The first thing I do is decide where the beginning of round marker will go. This is a simple chart, and I tend to use the right edge of the color, so I don't necessarily color that, but I will let me add a line of red just to remind you where I am color coding, where I am beginning the round. If you can see that round, that mark right there, that is the beginning of round. And so when I begin working this chart, I will knit in this direction on the row below the chart, and then I will do a short row turn and begin working row number 2. In order to color code the chart, I am going to use a different color for each strand, and I'm going to keep white as my ball of yarn. So I would knit this stitch number 2, and then the purl stitch number 2, because I just did a short row turn from a knit row. I'm purling this stitch number 2 and stitch number 1, purl all the way around the circular fabric in the round. I come in still on row 1, purl across all these stitches, and then I pick up my black yarn, and I might as well color code it by switching to a dark color. So I will mark those as black up to the beginning of round marker. At this point, I intertwine the strands of thread as described in the original video in how to knit in the round Intarsia. And so I'm now going to knit back in the other direction and knit those 3 sweaters. Let me say again, that is not a short row turn. It is a special treatment that I described in the earlier video. So go watch that video if you haven't seen it. That's essential to understanding how we're working this in the round. I then switch back to my ball of yarn, and I knit off in this direction. I'm now coming in on row 2, knitting on the same row. I just went out this end. I come in row 2. I intertwine the yarns with the black again and start back in this direction on row 3. I purl row 3 in, and I have a choice I can make here. If I purl these stitches all the way across to here and then drop my white yarn there, I'm going to come back on the next row, and in order to continue that white yarn all the way out here, I would have to carry the strand all the way from here to here. And I don't want to do that. So I have two choices. I can break the strand here and then work these then I'll knit these, turn, purl, knit back. I'm sorry, I purled these originally, and now I'm knitting back on these, and I knit all the way out to here. And as I said, one choice is to cut the strand there and start that strand again over here. Another choice would be to introduce a new strand at this point. Both of those produce two ends of yarn to weave in later. It doesn't matter which one you choose to do, but do not stretch a strand of yarn from this location on row 3 to this location on row 4. If we followed this color-coded chart, we would use the ball of white to here, drop the ball of white, start a new strand of white that is only this long, continue purling those stitches, purl these 3 blue stitches, reverse directions, knit the blue stitches back over here, and we're done with these blue-white strands, this strand that is coated in blue but actually is white. So you have this end and this end to weave in. You still have 2 ends to weave in. It doesn't really matter which way you do it. We then continue on with the ball of white and knit off these 3 stitches on row 4. We come in on row 4 over here, reverse directions, and begin purling on row 5. I didn't mean to make that blue. On row 5, we are purling these 2 stitches. We come in the left side on row 5, purl these 3 stitches, switch to our strand that we are coating in blue, purl all of those across here, reverse directions, purl those, and now I have left my white strand over here. I'm certainly not going to bring it all the way over here. I'm going to start yet another new strand of white. So these will be knitted in white across here. The blue has been left over here, so now I need a new strand of black. I'll mark those in this burgundy color. So that's a new strand of black. Now I pick up the white that is attached to the ball, continue knitting off that edge of the chart, come in on the same row here, reverse directions, go back out, purling on row 7. Come in, purling row 7, and now I'm going to continue using that strand of black that has been coated in red or burgundy. I'm then going to pick up the strand of white, interlocking them, of course, as described in the original video, and then purl those across here. I then can pick up the blue, the black that's coated in blue that was left right here. So I pick up that strand, continue across, then I go up a level as I reverse directions. I do that, The white has been left all the way out here, so but I've left a strand of white here that's beige, so I can actually continue that strand at this location. There's no big jump because I left it right here on the row below. Now I just continue it here, and I work it all the way across till I get to where I dropped this strand of white. I then pick up that strand of white, interlocking the two strands of white right here, just like any other color change. And then I knit the white off here. I come in on row 8 over here. I reverse directions, purl out row 9. I come in row 9, now working my ball of white, and I can work it all the way across to here with no problem. I then continue the blue coated black, reverse directions, take it back out that way, continue the white, bring the white in over here, take the white in back out over there, do the white all the way across here, and then the blue across here, and I'm done with my chart. Now I want to reverse directions and start knitting across, but I ended the chart on a purl with black. How do I continue the white? I left the white over here. This might have been a big swatch of black. How am I going to pick up this white and continue in the other direction? This is another tip. If you end up not connected where you have to start your strand in the opposite direction, which only happens half the time. If the chart ends on a purl row, this will be the case. You then simply slip the stitches across and then continue the white on the next row up. So I hope that's clear. It's just a tip how to continue the chart when you're continuing in the round. That white is interlocked with the black here, so it isn't a problem that it's then up at the next row. You come across here and you come around and you knit these stitches and you're knitting in the round again. I have simulated in my mind the knitting of this chart in order to color code it one row at a time. When I have completed the chart, and this is the completed chart for this color-coded chart. Again, when I've completed the whole chart, even if it's this complicated, it looks like that. When you start a new section of color and want to cut a new strand to work that section of color, I want to show you how you can know how long you should make the strand so you can cut just the length you need and have one long strand that will be sure to cover all of the stitches in that section but not be a huge amount left over. I don't use bobbins or butterflies. I find they get in the way and they get tangled around each other, and it takes me forever to keep them straight. Maybe you are more successful at it, and maybe you'd like to do that. You can use strands, you can use butterflies or bobbins if you want to, but you still want to only cut the amount of yarn you need for each one. I just simply leave the strands long and straight, and they get a little wrapped around each other, but as I start each section, I just pull that strand out of all of the mass of yarn. It pulls right out every single time. It's usually less than 3 feet long, and so it's not difficult to do. I find it just removes a lot of the aggravation of knitting Intarsia when there are lots of color sections and strands to deal with. So let me show you how to calculate the length of a strand when you start a new color section. First of all, you'll count the number of stitches in that section. You know how many there are because you have color-coded your chart, and you've come to that new section and you can simply count the number of stitches. If you then know how long each how much yarn each stitch requires, you can then multiply that length times the number of stitches, and that's how many inches it will take to knit that section. You can add 12 inches to that number, which gives you an extra 6 inches at each end to weave in the ends later. That's basically the process. So all you need now is to know how to calculate, how to find out how many inches or what the length of 10 stitches is. Oh, by the way, you really only want to know the length of one stitch. I guess I said that. But in order to find the length of one stitch, I actually knit 10 stitches and then cut them out and measure the length of yarn for 10 stitches, divide that length by 10, and that gives me the length of the yarn for one stitch, which I can then use for my calculation. Let me show you how I do that. Here I've created a very small swatch. Made sure it was more than 10 stitches wide. I think it's actually 16 stitches wide. And I knitted a few rows. Doesn't matter how many. Could have been 1 or 2. I think I did 3 or 4. I don't know. So anyway, we've got this section here, and we're just going to pull that out. I'm going to take my scissors, and I am going to snip the yarn between 2 stitches. Count 10 stitches over. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Check the count. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Snip it on the other side. Pull out the 10 stitches. And then I'm going to measure the length of that yarn. That yarn is about 5.5, maybe 6 inches long. Now we know how long yarn it takes to knit 10 stitches, and we want an estimate of how long the yarn is for a single stitch. So we simply divide that length by 10. And before we do that, we want to add a little bit to the length we measured, because we don't want this to be a tight estimate. We want it to be a very generous estimate. So let's say instead of 5.5 or 6 inches for 10 stitches, we will use the number 7. We will say, 7 inches definitely will allow us to knit 10 stitches. So we divide 7 by 10, and so a liberal estimate for each stitch is 0.7 stitches. I now have the number I need to calculate the length of color for every section. I count the number of stitches, as I said before, count the number of stitches in the section, and I multiply that number times 0.7. Pull out your calculator on your computer or your phone to do that. It's very simple. You just say number of stitches, say 25 times 0.7 equals. And that number is the number you will use for the length of the yarn before you add the 12 inches for the 2 ends you weave in. So add 12 inches to that number, and that gives you the total length of yarn that you want for that section. It's a lot easier to do than it is to describe in words, so I hope my words haven't confused you or made you think this is very complicated. You measure 10 stitches, divide the length by 10, add a little bit in the process to make sure it's a generous estimate, multiply the number of stitches times that the length per inch, add 12 inches for the weaving in of the 2 ends, and cut that length of yarn. And that is the yarn that will cover that section. So that's how you color code a chart. That's how you use the color-coded chart. That's how you know how long the strands are to cut. And now you are ready to do Intarsia as simply as it can be done in even a complex charted image. So I hope this helps you with your Intarsia. I hope it encourages you to give it a try. I'm having so much fun playing with Intarsia right now, and I hope you will too.